Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to resume the discussion. I will move a little bit away from this strange furniture because somebody has to be as tall as Kristaps Porzingis to see what's there. So since I'm much shorter, I have to stand next to it. It looks that we are reaching the most interesting point. Because NATO was debated, Russia was debated, Germany was debated. Now it's time for the Baltic Sea region. And the panel is devoted to challenges in the Baltic Sea region. First of all, I think we all here can agree that what happened in the Baltic Sea region in last 25, 28 years, it's a great success. We are not here to praise achievements in the Baltic Sea region because somebody has to be really very, very strange in its set of mind to object the level of prosperity, stability, and also networks of cooperation existing in the region. But unfortunately, due to different factors, due to different political processes, the Baltic Sea region a little bit changed its philosophy. Identity slightly changed because of events in 2014. The pace of integration and cooperation has a little bit, again, of course we can discuss to what extent it changed, but we are also facing negative tendencies. Remilitarization of the region, disparities between countries are not disappearing as quickly as one could expect. There are still enough divisions in terms of economic progress, social issues, and so on. So there are plenty of challenges what to debate. And I'm very proud that organizers of the conference invited so excellent speakers, and each of the speakers could really present different perspectives on the Baltic Sea region. I will start with a speaker next to me. It's Kęstutis Paulauskas. Your family name sounds Lithuanian, and of course one could expect that you are going to represent Lithuanian point of view, but Kęstutis is working for NATO. Therefore, his position will be mostly based on NATO's perspective. The next one is Ambassador Reeks. Thank you very much for joining us. And you are US Command Europe advisor, civilian advisor, policy advisor. So you work for United States, but at the same time you are located in Europe. And it will be very interesting to hear your perspective on the Baltic Sea region. Pavel Bayev comes from Norway, so however, Pavel, I know you for quite a long time. I can hardly call you Norwegian. So, but anyway, your profession brings you to Norway. And Pavel Bayev is a researcher at Norwegian Peace Research Institute in Oslo. And the next speaker is Ambassador Maira Mora. At the present moment, Maira is Director General of the Council of the Baltic Sea States. And the last but not least speaker here in the row is Zanda Kalnia Lukashevitsa, who is Under Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And as you may know, Latvia at the present moment is presidency country in the Council of the Baltic Sea States. So quite interesting panel with different perspectives. And I would like to start with you, Ambassador Reich. So you are, again, as I said, US perspective, European perspective. How the Baltic Sea region looks from outsider's perspective. What are our challenges and what we have achieved, and probably what we are going to achieve in years to come? So please, floor is yours.
Thanks, Shana. And the bottom line, simple answer is, looks pretty good.
Thank you.
Certainly from Washington's perspective and from U.S. European Command's perspective out of Stuttgart. I am the civilian deputy to General Scaparrotti, who of course wears two hats as the commander of U.S. Forces Europe, U.S. European Command, and our component commands U.S. Army Europe in Wiesbaden, Air Forces Europe in Ramstein, and of course U.S. Navy Europe down in Naples. His other hat, of course, is as SACEUR, and we'll let our colleague talk more about the NATO perspective, but we try to sort of meld them both together, which of course underscores how important NATO is for the United States, as evident by the last communique. I don't think I need to restate the importance and our firm commitment to Article 5, and that of course embraces, it includes the three Baltic countries, but also the broader Baltic region in terms of other Nordic NATO members, but strong partners like Sweden and Finland as well. Let me just take a moment to thank the organizers for what is a truly terrific conference. I think it's my first opportunity to come to the Riga conference, and in fact, through my career, whether as a bilateral ambassador or as a deputy assistant secretary from the State Department, I focused much more on the Balkans than the Baltics, and it's really nice to be in a part of the world where the neighbors get along pretty well. So that's a good start to begin with, and I think it's something that has been reflected in how the Baltics are seen from outside. As Jana said, the conference has really covered well the different perspectives that we need to think about when we look at the Baltic Sea region. Germany, the EU, obviously NATO, coming up on 70 years and another 70 or 100 to go, and Russia. And I think the final panel after this on resilience will nicely round that out. I'm really pleased and proud of the role that the United States, through our embassy, has in supporting this conference year after year. And here in this building, having an American space dedicated to bilateral relations, better understanding and exchanges between Latvia and the United States, but that reflects our view of the whole region. It's great to see throughout this 2 days so many young people, and that's, I think, another perspective that we have on the Baltics. Young people who are interested in these issues. President Vika Freiberga in the first panel yesterday talked about the need for education, and I think that goes in my country as well. General Scaparrotti and I often talk about the fact that for more than a generation we haven't been focusing on the history, the geography, the civics that is so important to these regions, but to the transatlantic architecture as well, understanding why, based on historical perspectives, this is an important relationship, why the Baltic is important from a strategic perspective, but also the historical context in which that is. With our embassy, which General Hodges yesterday described as its own armored battalion under Ambassador Pettit, which is a wonderful statement. We have this presence here, and in fact, in a sense, we've had a 100-year presence, obviously interrupted, but always continuously recognizing the independence, the sovereignty of these three countries, and that is reflected in Washington, I think, in a very strong way, and certainly how we view from European Command, where these are 3 of 51 countries in our area of responsibility, but 3 unique countries in terms of the transitions that they have gone through. It's important to note, of course, given the centenary of Latvia, and I'm really honored to be here this year, and having visited Estonia and Tallinn earlier in the week, you know, that we talk a lot about meeting the commitments from the Wales summit. Let's also remember how we, the United States, have met the commitments made from the Wales Declaration of 1940, continuing the strong ties between the United States and the Baltics, and really symbolizing this important transatlantic link. We look, of course, at all of Europe through a few perspectives at European Command, and those are the lines of effort that that we have in terms of what we focus implementing the strategies that have been developed. First and foremost, of course, is deter Russia. We all realized in 2014 that that had to be a primary focus. And we've done so much. I don't need to go into the details here. That has all involved the Baltics. They've been a key part of that, very much a part of the enhanced forward presence, and very much part of the broader strategy outlined in our own national defense strategy. Support for NATO is the other line of effort that we are focused on every single day. And again, that's where SACEUR and commander of EUCOM, General Scaparrotti, merges those two things so closely. Well, these are three of our closest NATO allies. And on the other sides of the Baltic, we have, as I mentioned, other long-standing NATO allies and very close NATO partners. It's important to realize how those partnerships can play an extremely keen role, and you here know very well how important Sweden and Finland are in our broader efforts. But we're also spending a lot of time every day looking at enabling global operations, because any strategy, deterring Russia, looking at the broad security needs of the transatlantic space, has to also consider other global factors. What is China doing? What is Russia doing in other parts of the globe? The things outside of the normal defense area, the sort of whole of government approach, countering trafficking, countering narcotics. These are all kinds of global operations that U.S. European Command supports, and our partners through NATO are often very much a part of that as well. And I have to compliment Latvia for being with us in so many deployments, really playing that role of an excellent ally. And then, of course, countering violent extremism continues to be a key part of what we do. All of these things merge together, but Latvia and all three of the Baltic countries have been important in that. They've been partners with us from Afghanistan, Iraq, the fight against ISIS, which is ongoing, and those continue to be a big focus for us. And so these countries in this region is seen as a net positive reinforcement of security much more broadly than just this important geographic space. We, of course, also have the responsibility for assisting Israel with its defense, which is part of European Command's area of responsibility, and continues to take up a lot of our time. The Eastern Mediterranean, of course, joining with the Baltic Sea is another area of major focus that also includes Russia. So all of these things are interrelated, but from Washington's perspective, we see this extraordinarily positive relationship with the three Baltic countries, but with the Baltic Sea region as well. And we really focus on the need for working together as a region. It's easy to say the three Balts do things together. They have common interests, common histories, unique histories as well, but also they work closely with neighbors separated by water in some cases, and of course with the large eastern neighbor always in our thoughts, in our strategies, and what we look at from EUCOM every single day. In that respect, whether it's Washington or General Scaparrotti sitting either in Mons or in Stuttgart, every day the general asks, what do we hear from the embassy? What is the ambassador saying about this? How are our connectivity with the local host governments? And all of that for this region is really, really strong. And that's kind of the perspective that we look at in saying that from Washington, certainly from Stuttgart, this region, with the challenges it has, looks pretty good.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador. You mentioned several elements which make the region strong. It's young people, education of very high quality, transatlantic architecture is present there. You have very good partners, reliable partners, that it's in your interest that you work together with the region as a whole, but not only individual countries. But you also mentioned several challenges, as Russia, which has to be deterred, then to keep NATO fit for its purpose in the region, and then a range of global issues where only in cooperation with partners more security can be achieved, including fight against extremism and many other issues. So thank you very much, and definitely we will come back to some of those challenges you mentioned here. And now I would like to give floor to Pavel Bayev, because one of the reasons why I want Pavel to step in as a second speaker is that for quite some time we spoke about Baltic Sea region as a region which is to some extent closed. It's very comfortable. EU is here, NATO is here, okay, there is one troublemaker, some countries are not so much interested, but still it's like a closed area. And then at one point we discover that there are neighboring regions, like Arctic, for instance, which has much more sometimes power than the Baltic Sea region, because US is there, Canada is there, Russia is there, now China has its strategic interest in Arctic. So therefore this is a question how closed the Baltic Sea region is and how it interacts with its neighboring regions. So please, Pavel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Senator. And it's a privilege to be a part of this endeavor. I'm really impressed with the conference. And your question is seemingly very simple. It's probably easy to say who is in and who is out, how the connections, you look at the map and all the connections are there. But in fact, there are many layers of complexity, and to give you a full answer, it will take a lecture. And I'm not very good at giving lectures, I have to say. So for that matter, I will break it out completely, the question about to what degree Germany is in. We just had a session on that, and my takeaway from that session is a typically Russian saying, in principle, yes. What I want to emphasize is that geopolitics, this perspective, is supposed to be very stable. Geography is there, map is not changing, it's not like the weather. And in fact, what we have in the Baltic region is a lot of changeability. You can see where our strategic worries were focused. And 3 years ago, probably it was Narva. And then 2 years ago, it was the Suwalki Gap. And a year ago, suddenly it was Gotland. And I have to say that generally each of these concerns have been addressed. And my vision for that region is generally it is much safer than it used to be. It's probably as safe as it could be done. And NATO is doing a very good job. We have just heard about that, and we had a session on NATO on that, which doesn't mean that we can collectively relax. For once, it's impossible to build a reliable defense. It was never possible. It wasn't possible in Germany 40 years ago. We need to combine defense with deterrence. If you have defense, you don't need deterrence. We need a combination of both. And deterrence is such a thing which is never done. It's always a work in progress. New efforts are needed, have to be invested. New worries come to the surface. It is really a never-ending thing. But all in all, I would say that Russian experiments in projecting power in this region are very effectively deterred at the moment. It doesn't mean that Russia in general is contained. There are many drivers that push Russia for aggressive policies. But I would maintain that it will go for easier targets, probably. And that yesterday it was mentioned that the Black Sea region looks much more risky than the Baltic Sea region. And indeed, you look at the track record, most of the Russian experiments in projecting power happened there. From Georgia to Syria, including Crimea and between, and the Donbass war, that's probably where we might expect new experiments of this sort. But what about our region here? looking at all the kind of hard work which is done, and yes, the feeling of safety which is kind of growing every day. Here we also need to take into account one plain thing, that deterrence works in the kind of world of real rational choices, where you have kind of cost efficiency balances, where you have all sort of strategic planning and resource allocation. That's where you can apply the deterrence perspective. And I think what Paul Felgengauer was saying yesterday about Russian general staff and its plans, that's where kind of key points are effectively addressed. But deterrence doesn't work quite well against the feelings, so to say. You cannot deter attitude. And quite often, these attitudes very strongly shape the political decisions, and we have an example of that very recently, for instance, in Syria, where suddenly in this kind of crisis situation, where for Russian military was important and essential to cover its own blunders, and it found no better scapegoat than Israel. On the background of that choice, so much ugly and strong feelings came to the surface that I was surprised as a kind of, as a strategic analyst, so to say. I never thought that kind of that would generate such a wave of ugly feelings. And we cannot exclude anything of the sort here as well. One thing about Russian kind of way of doing military activities is that the level of risks are accepted, which by our standards here are entirely unacceptable. And Russia sees that readiness to accept this risk as an important advantage. And with this risk come increasing risk of all sorts of accidents, catastrophes, disasters. And in every such situation, the need to cover its own blunders means that the blame game is going on, so that the blame is allocated where it always belonged on somebody else. And we had a bit of that with the Kursk disaster, but at least then it was kind of more or less established as a political fact of life that NATO has nothing to do with that. It was no US or UK submarine. You might say if such a thing will happen again, it will be probably a different situation. And that brings me to the fact that the highest concentration of these risks is in the high north, in the Barents region, where a lot of Russian nuclear and military capabilities are concentrated. And this high north, very often looking from Riga, and from Vilnius, and from Berlin indeed, looks like an entirely different and in many ways irrelevant area, too far away. But there is a real and strong strategic connection, which goes, first of all, at least when you look from Moscow, through Finland and Sweden. These two countries are kind of coming closer to NATO, building partnership and increasing cooperation, and each step along this road is seen in Moscow as a strategic challenge, which presumably, if again you're sitting in Moscow, is preventable. You can prevent this trend if you apply enough pressure. And pressure hasn't been very helpful in this regard. It hasn't stopped this trend at all, and the lesson learned in Moscow is you need to apply more pressure, typically. And it's sort of difficult for that matter to apply pressure on the Finland. You put your Arctic brigade very close to Rovaniemi. It's a short distance there, and there is no Mannerheim line around Rovaniemi last time I checked. But you make a strong move in that direction, and the Finns might make a very symbolic move towards Viborg. And, the population of Viborg might very joyfully and cheerfully capitulate. And that possibility cannot be excluded in Moscow, so there are limits to what sort of pressure you can apply here. It may be much easier to apply the pressure further high north, where Russia has invested a lot in building up its military capabilities. On the Kola Peninsula, first of all, further east as well, but primarily here. And building up this position of power means you need to find a way to use it, to convert your investment in the military infrastructure into some tangible political dividends. And Russia has not found a way to do it so far, And I am not going to give them any tips in this regard, but there is this inherently problematic situation up north where Russia has a position of military superiority and military dominance, which is rather rare in the whole Russian strategic posture. So attention there is important because at least up north there is one particular piece of real estate which is not just indefensible. There are many places which are hard to defend, but where Russia can just walk in, like in Crimea. There are very few places of this sort, maybe 40 in Georgia is another, but Russia can walk in the Spitsbergen, Svalbard archipelago. It is demilitarized by the kind of conditions of the very old Spitsbergen Treaty. And there is a Russian settlement there, and you can invent all sorts of pretexts because there are always kind of fisheries there, and the track record of fishery cooperation is very good with Norway, but quarrels always happen, even between UK and France. There is a Russian settlement, and it's very easy, in fact, to move into that piece of kind of real estate to make a grab, expecting that this would challenge, first of all, NATO solidarity. How to respond to that? It is one of those cases where all sorts of hybrid methods can suddenly work. You don't need to go into full-blown military intervention. You can experiment of this sort. And I think that was one of the points in the Russian recent exercises, Vostok 2018, where the Northern Fleet, for the first time in its history, went all the way to Chukotka and to perform amphibious operations there. And the point was that if we can do it towards Chukotka, we can very easily do it in the western direction where our real interests are, where kind of our Northern Fleet priorities always were. That's our prime area of operation. So that's why I see that the new risks might need more attention from NATO. There is an important exercise happening now as we speak in this region. Probably more of a consistent effort needs to be done. But then deterrence is always a work in progress, and I hope we will achieve great progress in this work. And I will stop here, probably. I've used my time.
Yeah, thank you, Pavel. Actually, you again emphasize the same issues which Ambassador Rieger was mentioning. So the Baltic Sea region is in a pretty good shape. You don't see big challenges here. So you are more concerned about what is happening in the north, so high risks in high north, which on the other hand is important message also for the Baltic Sea region, and not to sleep very well at night, but to think also about what is happening in neighboring areas. But one of the reasons why the region is in pretty good shape and could feel safe is because of NATO presence here. So, and it brings me to your presentation, Kęstutis. So how NATO looks at the region right now, but what is more importantly, what has to be done to continue on the same safe path. So please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Janetta. NATO looks very seriously at the region.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pity I could not attend yesterday's proceedings. I had a good excuse. We were preparing the Defense Ministerial next week. I'm looking at Yuri somewhere in the crowd who will attend it. And we'll try to sort out the aftermath of the Brussels summit last July. Now, when we look at the Baltic Sea region and the Baltic countries, it was always at the focus of NATO for at least for the last 4 years. What happened? There have been at least 3 significant shifts in the environment. Number one, we have moved from a discretionary environment where we, NATO, collectively could choose where to engage, by what means to engage, and mostly outside NATO territory. With 2014, and we have mentioned that a lot today, and I assume yesterday, we are faced with a non-discretionary environment where the potential adversary chooses how to engage, where to engage, and by what means to engage. That leads to a second shift, the time-space continuum. For a long time, we have been planning, or our assumption was that major conflict cannot happen in Europe, or it may happen, but we will have at least 10 years advance notice. With Ukraine, that time horizon has collapsed from 10 years to potentially a few days. So we lost time. And that has had a massive effect on how we understand geography. So our understanding of geography has changed from the global village, where we have time to go wherever we want to go, discretionary environment. We had to rediscover geography. We rediscovered that the Atlantic is a pretty broad ocean. We discovered that Europe is a pretty large continent, and it takes a lot of time to move forces from United States through the Atlantic, across Europe to where they need to be if necessary. So time-space continuum. And the third shift was in the way we approach defense planning. And it's about mass and speed. This morning someone said that the clique in Kremlin is very small. That might be the case, but that small clique is commanding a very large army. And Pavel has mentioned Vostok, which is a case in point. They have mass and they can move at speed. And that is a big challenge for NATO and for allies. So what NATO has been trying to do about it? Of course, our concern over Baltic security was the centerpiece of alliance adaptation. I would venture to say that this is what triggered alliance's adaptation in 2014. And NATO moved remarkably quickly. If you remember 2014 March, we have instituted all allies at 28, then minus Montenegro at that point, agreed on immediate assurance measures. We stepped up training and exercises on land, in the air, and at sea in the Baltic states and Poland, within a matter of days, not even weeks. Wales Summit, Defense Investment Pledge, Readiness Action Plan, Enhanced NATO Response Force, advanced plans including for this region, establishment of NATO force integration units in the Baltic states and other allied countries. Then came 2016, Warsaw Summit, of course, where allies agreed on the strengthened alliance's deterrence and defense posture, with its most visible element being the enhanced forward presence. It's a true game changer in the regional security. And as we have been doing all of that, of course, we have been stepping up our cooperation with Sweden and Finland on Baltic Sea security matters. Where we are now, the Brussels Summit. Well, Warsaw was a lot about deterrence, making sure that we do have a credible deterrent, including in this region. Brussels Summit was very much about implementation of Warsaw decisions, about consolidation, and about coherence of our posture in its entirety, which needs to, again, it needs to work for the Baltic Sea, for Black Sea, for the High North, for the Mediterranean, in all directions. But I was trying to explain the Secretary General Stoltenberg, what does it mean, a coherent posture of the alliance? And I gave him this, my favorite five-finger metaphor, which is easy to explain and easy to remember. With one finger, you can wag it at someone, you can point the finger, you can poke the eye, you can show the middle finger if you wish, but you need all five fingers to punch someone in the face and really be able to fight tonight and to fight tomorrow. So number one, you need to be able to pick up the signal that something is coming at us. We need a better situational awareness, and we have taken lessons away from Georgia, from Ukraine, from Syria. We have learned from that, and we have been getting better at our situational awareness, especially for short notice, large-scale scenarios. Number two, it's making the decision, what Secretary of Defense Mattis calls the decision-making at the speed of relevance. Allies were working on the process, procedure, and structure, how to make sure that we can make the decision on time. Once you make the decision, number three, you need to give that order to your command and control structure. This is why we have been adapting our NATO command structure, including by establishing new commands, so that it is fit for purpose and can do the whole spectrum of missions. Number four, command and control is not enough. You need to have the actual troops who can execute the order. This is why we have things like NATO Readiness Initiative, but also the NATO defense planning process in its entirety, where we have actually asked from allies much more speed and much more mass than in previous years. And they have committed, including Germany, as we discussed in the previous session. And number five, you need to get those forces where they need to be. And this is about enabling our infrastructure This is about military mobility, and I'm sure that Ben Hodges has talked about that yesterday. And you need to train and exercise those 5 fingers so that you can make the fist and if necessary, punch someone in the nose. On top of that, there is a particular challenge. So that fist is your, if you wish, conventional defense fist. And it works in deterrence terms. How do I know NATO has not been attacked by military force? So that's the only measure you can find for credibility of deterrence, and that is a proof we have not been attacked. However, the difficulty is that when it comes to other domains, we have been attacked, and our deterrence posture has been failing in the face of hybrid attacks, cyber attacks, information attacks, interference in elections, and the Baltic Sea region has been a mini-lab for those kinds of attacks. Harassment of US ships, harassment of Swedlink, airspace violations, you name it, election processes, television propaganda, if you wish, etc., etc. So our posture is not that great in deterring those kinds of attacks. Of course, you could argue that perhaps it is not the right posture to deter, but we do need to think collectively how to start to counter these threats. And my final point would be on my 2 favorite partners, Sweden and Finland. So when we talk about the coherence of posture, we talk about the need to ensure that there are no vulnerabilities. We like to call the South as our soft underbelly, but Sweden and Finland could also be seen as the soft skull of European security. And why is that? I'd like to call them allied partners. We have been getting closer and closer together. We do joint assessments. We train and exercise together. We invite the ministers to our defense ministers' meetings. We're great friends. However, we have been skirting the real issue, the strategic issue. And it's not the membership issue at all. We have a new posture of deterrence and defense. We have drawn a political line of deterrence, if you wish. And we have not had that discussion with our Swedish and Finnish friends on which side of that dividing line are they. It would be a cool thing if they could associate with things like the Brussels Summit Declaration, which would be a clear political signal. Again, this is not about membership, it's about political signal. Are they part of European and Euro-Atlantic deterrence and defense infrastructure, if you wish, yes or no. So that is something that we need to look at also. But I'll stop here. Thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you very much, Kęstutis. You proved points which were made by Ambassador Rieker and Pavel, that region is in a pretty good shape and NATO is doing its job. So therefore, we can really consider that years to come, so the same tempo and the same commitment will be present here. But you also very rightly emphasized that the region, with the assistance of NATO, is quite good at conventional attacks, so actually meeting them. But if it comes to cyber information, interference in elections, then situation looks slightly different. But you rightly also pointed out that NATO is going through adaptation, and this process is really very active. And the region has benefited from this adaptation very much. But now we can talk about another organization, the Council of the Baltic Sea States, which also is undergoing its adaptation. So, Ambassador Mora, what kind of challenges you could add to the list?
Thank you. I would like to start by that I don't want to foster or involve too much of gender stereotypes, but the previous 3 speakers were speaking about hard aspects of security. I'll speak about the soft ones. And I would like to go back to the history a little bit, because our organization last year turned 25. It was established very shortly after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 92 by the initiators of this organization were 2 countries, Germany and Denmark, who at that time were the only ones who were EU members. It was intended, the organization was intended to integrate all the post-Soviet countries around the Baltic Sea. Now, the situation 26 years later is that there are 3 countries which are not EU members, and that is Iceland, Norway, and Russia, which of course is quite an adds to the relevance of this organization and also to a certain extent of allure. One of the most prosperous regions, it was mentioned here at this panel before, it is true, but it is also one of the most cooperation-prone regions, because if I start calling all this alphabet soup of organizations and institutions that are active in the region, the oldest one is, of course, and the forefather and the model of to emulate in intergovernmental cooperation was, of course, the Nordic Council of Ministers. But the Baltic Sea Parliamentary Conference, Baltic Sea States Sub-Regional Cooperation, VASA, Visions and Strategies around the Baltic Sea, BEAC was mentioned, Barents Euro-Arctic Council, HELCOM, Baltic Sea Region University Network, Union of Baltic Cities, BASTON, it's a trade union cooperation. And I could go on indefinitely. But there, of course, it leads to a certain I would say, from my point of view, the more the merrier. If people want to cooperate, it should be fostered. It leads to these networks, to this close tangle of also including people-to-people contacts. That itself is an important aspect of soft security. But of course, it also leads to a certain overlapping of activities, and one starts to think about the rational use of resources. And here I would like to mention that in the light of the 25th anniversary, our governing body, the Council of Ministers, convened a high-level group of experts and independent experts to work out a vision for the Council of Baltic Sea States for the period after 2020, of which our distinguished moderator, Professor Rosolina, was a rapporteur. And now, currently, we are working on these recommendations that have been worked out and to prepare a plan for action and to finalize the reform of our organization. The priorities of the organization are a sustainable and prosperous region, safe and secure region, meaning civilian aspects of security, and the region with a marked regional identity. And the latter priority kind of embraces also the first 2 ones. The current situation quite distinctly shows that there is a developing, we are an intergovernmental organization with quite a high degree of institutionalization. But recent trends show that there is a developing trend of wider outreach and engagement with stakeholders other than line ministries or government institutions and agencies. And some of our units in the Secretariat who are engaged in project activities, notably the Task Force Against Trafficking in Human Beings and Children at Risk, they already work very closely with the local municipalities and NGOs, and actually are dependent on their inputs. But other activities of the Council show this same trend that to include a multitude of stakeholders, starting from government institutions and agencies to academia and to the private sector. And I think that closer ties among the stakeholders across the region and closer engagement in working out policy recommendations for the governments are a sure way forward in the future for our organization. And of course, it should be also reflected, should be the goal of our growingly intensive project activities, that also serve as an outreach to a wider audience. And the other point I would like to mention that is important for the future, for the safety, security, and future of the region is youth. Some time ago, a Swedish counterpart told me, you know, my sons know more about Bali than about Baltic states. And Sweden is just across a small sea from us. Of course, youth, as we all know, is a transient phenomenon. It is also very, how to say, difficult to engage on a long-term basis with youth organizations, because today's students quite quickly become tomorrow's decision makers. But exactly for that point, it is very important to work with the youth, because when we're reflecting on this vision for the Baltic Sea region beyond 2020, we thought it will not be us who will bring the region forward. It will be the young people who might, at this point, be still in the school. And our council is working, and the Secretariat is working in this direction. We have a number of initiatives. One of them is summer universities for students. This was a record year. We had 5 summer universities dealing with the different aspects and reflecting our priorities in the Baltic Sea region. And also there is such a project which is currently, we can implement it only thanks to the generosity of the German Foreign Ministry, but it is a youth dialogue that brings together young people and normally it takes place kind of in a cross-border setting. It has been Gdańsk, Kaliningrad. This year it was Helsinki, St. Petersburg. Last year, I mean, and this year it will be Denmark, cross-border border regions between Denmark and Germany. So I think that is one point where we should intensify our work in order to continue be the safest and one of the most prosperous regions in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you for your expose. Actually, you added very important arguments which explain why 3 previous speakers emphasized that the region is in a good shape. Because if we would focus only on hard security issues, so we probably would be hesitant to emphasize other very important issues of relevance to citizens of the region. And all speakers before, so Zander, your time will come, you also will join this path, that 2 very interlinked words or concepts were mentioned, security and safety. And NATO is very much taking care of security issues, while a lot of those cooperative structures which CBSS is fostering and supporting fall into category of safety, like youth, environment, human trafficking, children at risk, and so on. So these not overlapping but complementary cooperative networks are contributing to the region. Zander, you are representing presidency now in the CBSS, and Latvia has put forward its own priorities, but you also inherited a lot of issues which were already debated before. So usually when we look at presidency, we look at the country which finally will fix all the problems. So what is on Latvia's presidency table and how you will fix the problems?
Thank you, Professor. The small question on how to fix the problems in the region. I will try to structure my remarks around 3 points on the challenges, cooperation formats, and priorities. So from my perspective, and it's also perspective of the Latvian government, the security challenges are among the most prominent challenges and threats to the Baltic Sea region, but definitely not the only ones. So when analyzing situation in the region, We need to reflect on security, on sustainability, and inequality. So first of all, security and safety, as already mentioned, remain issues of concern. And actually, Russia's aggression has played its role. So the region has been experiencing a growing trend of remilitarization, and it implies risk of confrontation. So the level of mutual trust has not changed for better. The second challenge is connected with the situation in environmental vulnerability, because the Baltic Sea region really remains vulnerable. Environmental sustainability is one of the major challenges for the region. And thirdly, the socioeconomic conditions remain unequal. And this level of inequality, again, is a challenge for sustainable development of the region. So challenges have actually diverse impact on different regional cooperation formats. For example, when we look at the NB8 cooperation, so in this format, the cooperation has increased based on our common values. So deep involvement in the Nordic-Baltic partnership has been one of the priorities of the Latvian foreign policy for years. And so the stable and continuous long-term practical cooperation has played a significant role in democratic and socioeconomic growth of the Baltic states. So the NB8 has become a well-known brand in the international community, being characterized not only by geographical scope, but also with common values, like human rights, equality, and rule of law, and also by common challenges, like security, future of Europe, transatlantic relations. And here the cooperation is really close and also at the political level, and especially at the political level. But when we look at the Council of the Baltic Sea States, it is now mostly focusing on practical issues. This political dialogue is challenged by Russia's disregard of its international commitments to confidence and security building measures in Europe, and systematic efforts to undermine the international rules-based order. So Russia's willingness actually to ignore principles and values of democratic world does not help existing security tensions in the region. And dividing lines are not only still exist, but has become even deeper. So probably it is the main reason why it is so difficult for the organizations like the CBSS to define its modus vivendi. So traditionally, the CBSS was based on two pillars: political dialogue and practical cooperation. So nowadays, majority of the CBSS countries maintain regular political dialogue in the framework of different international organizations. And the political dialogue inside the CBSS for all its 11 countries is not so intense anymore and not so good anymore. So what one could ask, is there a future for the CBSS? And I believe, and I'm convinced that there are still aspects where this particular format actually is irreplaceable, and we need to continue dialogue. CBSS has a unique membership profile, including 11 countries of the region, including Russia. And its ability to address concrete, practical issues has a very high value. So CBSS long-term priorities remain valid. And we can see a huge potential in cooperation and making progress in several areas. For example, environment, sustainable development, child protection, trafficking in human beings, and others. So what can Latvia do to help to have any progress and to help to reach concrete results? Yes, since the 1st of July, Latvia is a presiding country of the CBSS, and the main goal for our presidency is to drive reform process of the CBSS. So during the presidency, Latvia will work on the implementation of the ideas and prospects expressed in the Vision Group report. And thank you, Professor, for taking part in this work. The document is really brilliant, and I suggest for everyone to take a look at that. So following the strategic goals of the organization and observing continuity with the previous presidencies, and at the same time taking into account the challenges we are facing, Latvia has defined 3 strategic directions and priorities. First of all, it's integrity and societal security. So we aim to work together to establish this culture of secure society. And it means that human trafficking remains a topical issue for the countries in the Baltic Sea region, and we will focus our work on this issue. At the same time, also strategic actions aimed at enhancing cooperation in civic protection area will be of high importance. And also, Baltic Sea border control cooperation remains another important framework for the cooperation of professional and exchange of professional information and experience in the region. So the second priority of the Latvian presidency is responsibility. So it means implementation of the sustainable development goals set by the Baltic 2030 action plan. It will mean focusing on circular economy and responsible consumption and production that is particularly interlinked with the green economy and green procurement. Smart governance of the cities is something that unites interests of urban planners all around the Baltic region. And also during our presidency, we will organize a ministerial level conference on the problem of plastic pollution in the Baltic Sea. As a follow-up of the discussion during the meeting of the foreign ministers of the CBSS this June in Stockholm. And the third priority for us is a dialogue, but a very specific dialogue for this year, a dialogue with a focus on cultural heritage. So there is a broader understanding of cultural heritage as an important element in the development of democratic, law-based, and cultural and oriented society. So therefore, cultural heritage plays a role both in shaping the regional identity and ensuring sustainable growth, the long-term CBSS priorities. So a dialogue among experts and other stakeholders is necessary in order to discuss heritage preservation systems. As you can see, the priorities are really very practical. I would say down to earth on the issues we can deliver. And we can try to avoid the problems in political dialogue and taking into account all the challenges we have. So to conclude, also in the future, the CBSS should continue to rest on the 2 fundamental pillars, political dialogue and practical cooperation. But this year, we will focus on the practical issues, and what we can do is really to be more specified and niche-oriented, to have the highest added value we can in this particular cooperation format.
Thank you, Zander. You actually pointed out several important issues. With the region is like with relatives, so you cannot choose them. You are where you are, and you have to cope with reality as it is. And of course, we have a lot of potential of our strengths, like institutionalization of relations, and indeed having one institution which incorporates Russia for good or for worse. So anyway, so there's a possibility to keep dialogue alive and to talk. But at the same time, you can have a child which doesn't behave according to the rules of good behavior, and then other tools have to be applied. So diversity of issues, diversity of institutions, challenges, different type of policies applied. So anyway, we have a very diverse picture. So how not to lose a track in this diversity and really to be pragmatic in the Baltic Sea region. So now it's time to ask questions. So probably, so many hands I have to manage this diversity. I will probably again start with one geographical region and then I will move to another one. So sorry, I will start with this side. I will pick up several questions and they will pass it to you and then you will answer and then I will go to another side of the room. Okay, please.
Hello, my name is Otto Tabons. I'm the Executive Director of the Baltic Security Strategy Project. And my question is that with the increasing prospect of developing distinct EU military assets and capabilities beyond Berlin Plus, may that serve as a vehicle for broadening Nordic-Baltic security cooperation? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And you address this question to?
Anyone who wishes to respond.
Okay, so you will decide. Okay. Yeah.
So my name is Olev Nikers. I'm director of the Baltic Security Strategy Project. And my question goes to the second and the third panelist. Yesterday, during the Kremlin talk, we heard very interesting thought, which refers to the security dilemma, that a Russian power, which is heavily militarized, wants to have an enemy. And what does it mean? Does it mean that Europe should not strengthen its military? And that refers as well to the Baltic Sea region. So what would be your response to that? To this thought. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Here.
Thank you so much. Kurt Engelen. I'm at Belgian Defense Strategy Department, but in this question I have a vested interest and I would like to address the question to Ambassador Mora and Dr. Lukasevic. I'm Belgian, but my children are both Belgian and Latvian, and they see their future as much in Brussels as in Riga. And when it comes to hard security, to defense, I have, being a military, a slight idea what they could do to contribute, of course, and one of them is going to join the Zemesarce, the National Guard. But you said very rightly that you need to engage with young people. And because the threat is not going to be purely military in the future, what can the young people do to participate not only to the defense but to the security of their country and the region here in the future? So, and especially, what message would you have for the many young Latvians, Lithuanians and Estonians who live outside the Baltic region? How can they contribute to the security of their region? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, here.
Hello, my name is Karsten Friis. I work at NUPI, Norwegian Institute of International Affairs in Norway. I'd like to Mr. Pawlowski's comment on Sweden and Finland about them aligning up to the summit declarations. But then Pavel Baev said also that, well, Russia might exert more pressure on these countries. The question is then, okay, how far can Sweden and Finland go aligning to NATO without it actually infringing in a negative way on their own security?
Okay, here's one question.
Hello, thank you to the panel for the great content. This question is addressed to Dr. Pawlowskis. In this year's Brussels summit, Cyberspace Operations Center was announced as in the development. The question is whether are these as implications for command and control structure? And the second part of this question, if such a concept is quite too soon for the cyber domain, which was made an operational domain in the Warsaw Summit of 2016, what is the plan to foster cyber attack awareness and interoperability due to the nature of cyber operations and cybersecurity as such, which tackles cross-sectoral issues such as economy and energy?
Thank you. I will wrap up so we can wait for the second round. Question about EU capabilities and how they can increase Baltic, Nordic security in the region. Who would like to take this question?
I can start certainly because it often is a question posed to somehow juxtaposing EU capabilities versus NATO and the US view. And to underscore, already the United States maintains over 35, I think, ongoing structured dialogues with the EU on everything from security to energy to trade and human rights. And all of those things contribute to security. And so we very much have welcomed the EU looking at what it can do working with NATO. And in fact, over the last 9 months, as EUCOM has restructured and transitioned itself back into what we call a warfighting command after the post-Cold War years, we have also focused on working through our mission to the European Union, working directly with the EU to coordinate on a number of these steps. So things like PESCO are exactly the kinds of things we've been promoting for decades with the EU. As long as you're looking at how those efforts can contribute to synergies, not duplicate, we're talking about compatibility in areas, for instance, like infrastructure and mobility, that's vitally important. And right now, I think we feel like things are on a good trajectory there in terms of EU and NATO coordinating, reinforcing each other. And for this region, I think we see very much, again, the view from Washington or from EUCOM in Stuttgart is that the Baltic region, particularly these countries, have really leveraged so well over the past 2 decades, over this generation, both NATO and the EU to help them transform into the countries they are today. And that has led to a high degree of stability, greater prosperity, better future. They're really using these elements of the transatlantic security architecture, the institutions of transatlanticism, EU and NATO in particular, to promote their stability, which then, of course, contributes to stability of the broader region and the whole transatlantic. So we welcome it very much.
Thank you very much. There was a question about a militarized country needs enemies. The question was addressed to Kęstutis and you, Pavel. So Kęstutis, probably you can start.
The academic in me would like to give a blunt and provocative answer. But as a NATO official, NATO bureaucrat traveling on NATO money, I have to be bland and carefully nuanced.
But you can use your fist.
Oh, yes, I can use my fist. I think there were a couple of questions addressed to me.
Yeah,
so
okay, you can bring them together.
I'll try to unpack them. The first one was on Russia, a very good question, actually. The official answer, you read the Brussels Summit Declaration, we say that Russia is not an enemy, and we still believe in a future partnership with Russia. We do have an agreed approach among allies, which is strong deterrence and defense, and on that basis, dialogue, meaningful dialogue. So there is a sense of priority, first deterrence and defense, and on that basis we build dialogue with Russia. And that's, I think that is a solid approach. The difficulty is that we as NATO, as an alliance, do not have a Russia policy, an actual Russia policy. We do not know, as an alliance, as NATO, what Russia is. Is it a friend? Is it a partner? Is it a potential friend? Is it a potential adversary? Is it a potential enemy? Is it an enemy? Is it a threat? Politically, we have not agreed. And if you read carefully Brussels Declaration, you will find 4 or 5 paragraphs on Russia which are highly contradictory. And that is a challenge at the NATO level. To have a solid posture and have a meaningful dialogue with Russia, we need to first agree what Russia is to NATO, and that is a problem. Number two on Sweden and Finland, and thanks for that question. When I talk to my Swedish and Finnish friends, they always explain me that they are concerned with pursuing NATO membership because that could potentially escalate things with Russia. On the other hand, if things escalate with Russia, it will not be the time to start discussing membership of Finland and Sweden. So they are really in a catch-22 situation. It's a bit like with the EU ever closer union. So we have this ever closer partnership with Sweden and Finland. The problem is that we are rapidly approaching the limit of how close that partnership can be without addressing the real strategic issue. Are they with us, or are they non-aligned, neutral? Choose the acronym if you wish. The cyber question, very quickly. It is a new domain, it's a very sensitive domain, and it's a very complex domain. We, NATO, are finding our way around it. We are very much dependent on those allies who have the cyber capability. So we're talking about sovereign effects that individual allies can bring to NATO operations. We do have, we are creating an element in NATO command structure, the cyber cell that you have mentioned. But these are very early days, and this is a very complex game. Why? Because we do not fully understand yet the implications of the cyber game in terms of deterrence and defense. What does it mean, cyber deterrence? Can we deter cyber attacks? If no, can we defend them? If no, can we counterattack? And what does it mean, offensive cyber? Do we fully understand the implications of even threatening with cyber offensive Russian nuclear command and control and the implications of that? So there are lots of questions that we have not yet addressed collectively as an alliance, as the think tank community, if you wish. But we have started, and it's work in progress.
Thank you. And Mara, there was a question. Oh, Pavel, you also wanted to jump. Sorry.
Very briefly on the point of Russia militarized and its enemies. I want to say that there is a difference, big difference, between Russia and the Soviet Union. Soviet Union didn't have a military machine, it was a military machine, and Russia is not. The level of militarization is significant, but it's not really that big. And Russia is also far more open than the old Soviet Union. So constructing enemies is not that easy task with all the aggressive propaganda, and it sometimes can be very vicious. Whatever kind of however you try to present aggressive NATO intentions in the Baltic region, it is still very obvious, not only for security experts, but for many common Russians who have ties with this region, that the scale of these activities is not threatening in any meaningful way. That NATO is not preparing to launch an offensive into Russia from the Baltic states. And I think that simple truth cannot be overruled by many layers of propaganda. There is still too much common sense in the Russian public. It was a question asked to the Russian panel whether Baltics are seen as a threat, and the answer was yes. And I respectively disagree. Neither Georgia is perceived as a threat, nor for that matter Ukraine is perceived as a threat. And there are threats coming here for the regime, I agree. Every step in achieving prosperity and stability in the Baltic, every step in reforms in Ukraine, every step in Georgia is an implicit threat to the integrity of Russian regime. Yes, this is true. But as far as kind of Russian public opinion is concerned, I wouldn't overestimate the capacity for its manipulation.
Thank you. Mara, what would be your message to children living outside of the Baltic Sea region?
Thank you. I think, in a way, this question was kind of highlighted one problem with young people today. They don't have the regional mentality or even the local mentality. They live in a global world much more than we did. The world is open and the high degree of mobility and also the information space where they live, it cannot be determined by region. Where I would, as I said, we deal with the soft aspects of security rather with the civil preparedness. For example, because of climate change, disaster risk reduction, civil preparedness for disasters. But I would, to the young people, I would say again, the question to raise this awareness and think what they could do for the region is a question for the stage when they cease to be youth and become grown-ups and start settling down. And then the very essential question is, what would be the world or the part of the world that you would like to leave to your children? What kind of it will be? Littered with plastic, littered with microparticles, or barren, or prosperous and safer and healthier to live in. Yeah.
Thank you. Now we could take questions from the side.
May I answer the question as well?
Sorry. So I'm worried about those who raise their hands. So, okay, Zanda, go on.
Yeah, about the question about the young people. Yeah. Definitely they are invited to join the Zemesardze, the National Guard you already mentioned. And our aim is to increase the number of National Guards up to 200,000. But when we talk about the young people living inside and outside Latvia and the security of Latvia, it immediately makes me to think about the hybrid threats we are facing, and especially the attempt of Kremlin with a massive amount of propaganda and disinformation. And it means that young people, and not only young people, really need to have a very high level of media and news consumption hygiene. So we have to increase our media literacy.
That's very important.
And it goes together with another aspect that we really need to strengthen the unity in the society. So we cannot allow to drive dividing lines in the society. And it means, first of all, increase trust in our institutions. Yes, we need to improve efficiency of the institutions, but we also need to recognize as a society the progress we have achieved during the last decades. So we cannot allow the Kremlin to impose the rhetorics of the so-called failed state and that everything is bad. Because when we look back at the beginning of the 90s and compare to the situation today, so we need to recognize what has been achieved. And this ability to see the reality, ability to recognize what is real news and what is disinformation coming from Russia is of incredible importance for the safety and security of our country and of the region.
Thank you, Zander. Let's start here with a question in the second row, please.
My name is Glenn Howard. I'm president of the Jamestown Foundation in Washington, D.C., and my question is for Ambassador Rieker. As you know, there's a U.S. side of you, and there's a debate going on in the United States and we heard it partially yesterday, with the polls now asking the United States to create, quote-unquote, Fort Trump and base U.S. forces there in Poland. At the height of the Cold War, the United States had over 350,000 ground troops in Europe to deal with the Soviet threat. Now there's less than 50,000 American forces. General Hodges has often kind of observed that the nature of basing needs to go away from a garrison-type mentality of bases to a greater issue of mobility and strategic ability to redeploy. And so is the question more of should we develop, you don't have to avoid the question of Poland, but is the larger issue because we don't have the forces available, should we start considering redeploying certain elements like the 173rd in Vincenza, Italy? Maybe that could be the answer to relocating some of these American forces to make them more kind of relevant against the Russian threat in Europe. And that's the question for you and Ambassador Paluckas, or Doctor, if you prefer to answer, that's fine. But that's my question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Veiko, please.
Yes, Veiko Spolits, MP here in Latvia, and also a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Baltic Sea States. So I have a question. Thank you for all the panelists for excellent speech and responses already. But I have a question to Professor Baev and also to Zander Lukashevitsa. So first, you quite clearly explained the possible adventurism in Svalbard Islands, and the exercises in the Kotelny Island quite attest to that. But it wasn't clear, so could you clarify this possible adventurism on Viborg and the problems in Lapland? It wasn't quite clear to me, so could you please clarify that? But the question to Zanda is, actually in Parliamentary Assembly of the Baltic Sea States, we've achieved quite a lot. Thanks to the Finnish taxpayers, actually, there been establishment of the sewers in St. Petersburg. Thanks to all the Baltic states, sorry, not Baltics, but all the EU member states who are in the Baltic Sea area, we've been helping Kaliningrad to establish sewage systems, which opened only early this year, so our sea is getting cleaner. So you mentioned these practical works and political dialogue as the two main things for the CBSS, but if we speak about the practical works, so one idea is, it could come into mind, so could you clarify what these practical works could be, because the sea line security in the Baltic Sea, because of the oil trafficking from, not trafficking, but oil shipments from Russia to the Rotterdam and other ports. Is it the sulfur directive which actually, in a short perspective, hits the European shipping companies? So what other practical works are there during the Latvian presidency? Thank you.
Thank you, Veiko. Two questions over there, please, in the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Amy Feeney from the UK Ministry of Defence. My question is for whoever would like to answer, really. So it's related to increasing military cooperation between China and Russia, thinking specifically of the joint naval exercise which took place last year in the Baltic Sea. So first I would like to ask, has this changed the threat perception in the Baltic states? And if these exercises look set to continue, how should the Baltic states and NATO more specifically be responding? Thank you.
Thank you. And one behind, so don't pass microphone.
Oh. Massimiliano Del Casale, Italian Center for Advanced Defense Study, Rome. First of all, let me thank you a lot for your presentation, for the expression, the deep expression that we heard this afternoon about the challenges that now in the near future we have to face in the Baltic area. But let me say that right now I have heard no word in the previous panel and the present one about the permanent structured cooperation, in other words, the well-known PESCO, which represent, in my opinion, but I think also in the general opinion, the first step that the European community are facing since the last part of the last year, so since November of the last year, in a common way to face the net challenges in the future. And in my opinion, and I think also it's not only my opinion, the general opinion that this initiative had to be taken after two main events, recent main events. The first is the present policy of well-known American first. The second one is Brexit. Both of them pushed Europe to take this initiative. Now, what is now the reality? So, I mean, does it mean that PESCO is not so near in the horizon of the Baltic region? This is my question.
Thank you very much. Sorry for stopping taking questions since we are running out of time and it's already in red color. It means that I have to wrap up at least your question session and pass floor to panelists to respond. And probably I will not follow question one by one, but I will ask you to pick those questions and answer. So anyway, they were asked directly to you. Let's start with Zander, please.
Okay, thank you. When we talk about the security, and there were like many remarks on that today, I think it's important to always think about that security, it's not only the hard defense and the classical military, it's always also about a question of perception of the security in the society. And therefore, for example, this increased numbers of National Guards I mentioned, aim to increase it up to 20,000, is connected both with security and ability to defend us, and also with the perception in the society. Answering the Veiko question about the practical examples of our cooperation, I would like to mention two. For example, during the presidency, a high-level conference on children corporal punishment prevention is planned this year. So, and actually this year we celebrate 20 years since the CBSS started cooperation on children at risk. And that was started in 1998 when it was also a Latvian presidency. And another example is youth, so the work, how to involve youth. And actually we started our presidency with a summer school here in Latvia called Media Literacy and Democracy, Baltic Perspective, inviting and involving youth from all around the Baltic Sea. So, and giving them opportunity to learn, to discuss, and to increase their media literacy. So, and there are many more that kind of very practical issues we can do together.
Thank you, Maira.
I just could add also to Veiko's question, particularly Baltic Sea pollution issues are HELCOM competence. But as I mentioned earlier, the practical cooperation it should continue also in getting together all the relevant stakeholders, not only the government institutions, and really go more vertical, not too much horizontal, and work out policy recommendations for the governments with a much wider support base and outreach in the population.
Thank you, Pavel. Now it's your turn.
I will not elaborate. Unfortunately, there is no time. I will only say very briefly that for the Russian regime, military force is a political instrument of choice. It has skill, it has a determination in applying it. It's very interested in experimenting, but this instrument is becoming limited. Russia has to cut down very significantly its military expenditures. That's the reality. So it has to go for easy targets. It has to pick some low-hanging fruits. And I don't think there are any low-hanging fruits around here.
Thank you. Ambassador.
I'll address the questions of force posture and relevance. And it's a great question because I think relevance is one of the terms that General Scaparrotti uses often in looking at our priorities and our strategic alignment. After 2014, as we've discussed throughout the conference and in previous years, the quick reaction that NATO took in terms of everything from our Operation Atlantic Resolve, EDI, and the now it'll be close to $10 billion that we put into that, the various deployments, the enhanced forward presence. We in Washington, from one administration through to the next, have looked more broadly at strategy, a return to a strategy for Europe that fits into a broader global strategy. And you can see it. I commend to you the documents, the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, and indeed the national military strategy. They're all quite readable and lay out strategy, including force posture guidelines for the 21st century. And we're not in a position to have 350,000 troops in Europe. And that's not what we need to meet the challenges and the threats, the hybrid challenges that we face today, the broad array of security challenges and softer challenges that we've discussed here. And so in that regard, we've really taken to establishing a military presence that's an effective deterrent to Russia, and reclaiming the ability essentially to fight Russia by focusing and building on coalitions and preparing what we call a combat credible force in Europe. The National Defense Strategy talks about a blunt layer, the concept of a blunt layer. Lethal is critical, denying the adversary the ability to achieve objectives quickly. responsive, leveraging global transportation, infrastructure. That's why mobility is so critical. Resilience is important, and the next panel will talk about that. And of course, above all, interoperability. And so geography, while important, and we have to look at all the different, the 3 Cs and all the different parts of the theater, adding in the global elements, including China and those questions, which we are addressing in Washington and trying to look at China and Russia together. But I think the idea, for instance, that Vicenza, where the 173rd is based, but which actually during my time in Italy, just a couple of years ago, transitioned to become U.S. Garrison Italy, which is the largest logistics hub south of the Alps, because the realization that geographically was very important for Black Sea challenges, Eastern Med challenges, other bases in Italy like Aviano and of course in Sicily have an important role in that. So it's very much what you're seeing develop, rotational deployments, very much focused and targeted on mobility, flexibility, interoperability, unpredictability. And that's really what the national security strategy, or the national defense strategy more specifically, calls for in how we look at managing the threats that we have as an alliance and as the United States contributing to that alliance.
Thank you. Kęstutis.
2 quick points to amplify Ambassador's answer on the force posture. Allied consensus for now remains that the modest forward presence in the Baltic states and Poland is a sufficient deterrent, full stop. When it comes to defense, our agreed paradigm remains effective and rapid reinforcement. So we need to be sure that we can get the forces we have where they need to be in time. So that's the current consensus. It may change in the future, but this is where allies are today. To the question on the PESCO, I cannot give you a Baltic perspective. I can give you a NATO perspective. Our Secretary General has on numerous occasions said that strengthening European defense contributes to European security, therefore contributes to NATO. It is a good thing. NATO and EU defense initiatives are fully complementary. Why? Because European defense initiatives are about European defense. And key word here is European. NATO is about defense of Europe. And here the key word is defense. So we are fully complementary, and everything that can strengthen that complementarity is most welcome from NATO side. Thank you.
Thank you. Despite the fact that we had a division at the very beginning, hard security and soft security issues. But I think that the discussion in the end indicated that, of course, we mentally can divide those 2 security pillars. But in the end, they meet each other more often than we can expect at the very beginning. And it was Pavel, you who said that you cannot deter attitudes. Probably exactly the cooperation in the post-Baltic Sea region, starting from hard and soft, it's about shaping attitudes which shouldn't be deterred, but to be embraced. So I apologize to those whose questions I was not able to take due to time limits, but the coffee break is for that purpose. So, and before inviting you to a coffee break, I invite you to join in a round of applause, thanking our panelists. So thank you.